Today we're going to make a one-way door that closes once the player walks through it. This could be useful for stuff like boss rooms. And this door is only going to reopen once we go and defeat the challenge that's inside the room. And in this case, it's bumping into this mysterious black brick. That reopens the door, and that's what we're making today. This is going to be a nice and easy tutorial, so open up your third-person project template and let's begin. Let's start with the theory before we dive into the code. Our boss door is going to be one mesh with two different trigger volumes. Trigger volume 1 is on the mesh itself, and trigger volume 2 is away from the mesh. As our player waddles through the door and crosses the first trigger volume on the mesh itself, nothing is going to happen. But once we cross this second actual trigger volume, it's going to send a signal that we need to close our door and brick up this trigger volume here. That means when our player tries to leave, they're going to see that the door is now closed and they're no longer going to be able to walk through because we're going to make this block all collision channels. And then further to this, we're going to also have an unlock method that's going to do everything that we just did in reverse, where it will open our door back up and then set this trigger volume on the mesh to ignore everything. The reason we need this second trigger volume is twofold. First, we can put it anywhere in the level so that no matter where the player is walking, you can control when the door locks. And then second, if our player gets cold feet, walks through the door, happens to be inside of this trigger volume, and then leaves, well, then the player isn't soft locked from entering the boss room because they changed their mind. So let's start coding. Inside your C++ classes folder, you're going to right click, create a new C++ class that is going to be of type actor, and I'm going to call this boss door. Once that finishes loading, let's go into our header file and let's create ourselves a new private section here and let's create everything that we're going to need. So this is the code to get the result that we talked about earlier. We need a method that we're going to call when the overlap ends with our certain trigger volume, and then we're going to need three different components: a mesh to represent the door in the world, a locked door volume that is going to sit on our mesh and get bricked up when we call for it, and then we have our door lock trigger. This is going to be what we place in the world that is going to be responsible for bricking up the other volume and closing our actual mesh. One note is with this onOverlapEnd method, you do need to use this exact signature because Unreal is very picky. Now in the public section above, we do want to add one new method. This is going to be a custom method we're going to make called unlockDoor. This is going to be what our boss object or our boss monster is going to call, which is why we need it to be public. Now I'm just going to create the definition inside my C++ file for both of these, and then we're going to go and dive in. So inside of our C++ file at the top, we need to include the box component. If we don't do this, we're going to get red squigglies and nightmare fuel the more that we code with it. So let's just put that in there. Inside of our constructor, this is where we're going to initialize all of our components, so I'm just going to go and do that here. For the purposes of this, our locked door volume, or the volume that's going to sit on top of our mesh, is going to be our parent. And I've gone through the creation of these different components in several different tutorials, so I'm not going to dwell on it much more than that. Inside of begin play, we're going to set up different relationships. So we're going to define a relationship between our custom method onOverlapEnd and our door lock trigger. Again, this is the one that we're going to place in the world that our player is going to walk through. And we're going to say when something is no longer overlapping, then we want to call this onOverlapEnd method that we're going to set up. And then for our mesh, we're going to set this so that its new rotation is going to be 90 in the yaw. What does this do in reality? If we pull in a door and we look at the rotation on the right-hand side, in the viewport we'll have the roll, pitch, and yaw. If I adjust the roll, it looks like it's going to have a dance party. If I adjust the pitch, then it looks like it's going to hit me in the face. But when I adjust the yaw, it looks like it's actually a door that's on a hinge, and this is obviously the behavior that we're going to want. And for whatever reason, Unreal Engine cannot have this be the same as the way it's presented in code. So in the viewport, it's roll, pitch, yaw, but in code, when you define a new rotator, it's always pitch, yaw, roll. So the important thing is to remember what you need to alter. In this case, it's the yaw, which is why we're adjusting what looks to be the Y coordinate, which does not line up with what we saw in the viewport. That is intentional. And the whole reason we're doing this at all is so that our door looks like it's open and welcoming for our player when they spawn into the world. Now, next I want to set up this onOverlapEnd method so that we can talk about what's happening. So when our player is no longer in that particular trigger volume, we're going to do three things. First, we're going to look at that trigger volume they just exited, and we're going to say never interact with anything again. And the way we're doing that is we're going to set the collision response on all collision channels to be ignore. What this is doing is, again, if we look at this door, if I pull up the mesh and I go to their collision settings, we can see here on the right-hand side that by default, this mesh is going to block every single collision channel. What that line of code does, it's going to change that default response from block, and it's going to set it to be everything to ignore instead. This means we're not going to collide with our player, and it also means we are not going to trigger any other overlap methods that would be happening if we were set to overlap. So this is just basically saying never do this again. again. Then on the flip side, our other volume, or the one that's going to be bricked up and prevent our player from exiting, we're going to change that so that all of its collision responses are going to block. So it becomes this impenetrable wall that stops our player from leaving. And then for dramatic effect, we're also going to take our mesh and we're going to set its relative rotation to be a bunch of zeros, because that's going to restore it back to its base setting, or a closed door. And with that explanation out of the way, it makes the unlock door method even easier. Or we're going to do the same but different. We're going to take our locked door volume, or the one on the mesh, and then we're going to set it so that it no longer collides or blocks anything by setting that volume to ignore all collision. And then we're going to dramatically reopen our door. And that's all the code we're going to need, so save this up and compile. And then what you can do is on your C++ class, right click, create a blueprint class. I'm going to call it my boss door, and I'm going to save it into content. And then we can create that boss door. So now let's get set up. I'm going to start with my mesh. I'm going to go into the static mesh and I'm going to search for door, because if you have the starter content, you'll have this sexy little door here. And now with our door in place, I'm going to take my locked door volume, or the parent of this object, and I'm just going to extend it out so that it fits our door a little bit better. And then I can slide my door into place, because again, we have to kind of obey what our parent wants here. Then I'm going to take my door lock trigger and I'm just going to throw it away so that it's easier to distinguish in the world. Because now when I compile this here, I'll delete our phony door and I'll drag in this door into the world. I'll set it up and I'm going to make it nice and big here. And I'm not going to do a particularly perfect job at this, but I'm just going to slide it into place into this hallway that I created earlier. So now inside of the actual world, I'm going to take my door lock trigger and I'm going to put this where I want it to be. And I'm just going to put it on the ground, about right in front of where our door would be. So now when I hit play, you can see that our door is open by default, which is what we want. And as I run through, you can see that I'm inside of that trigger volume. Nothing is closed yet. As I continue to walk forward, I'll eventually leave that trigger space. The door slams shut. And when I walk backwards, I am no longer able to walk through this space because we have bricked up that other trigger volume. Now, the other piece of this is creating some sort of task that is going to allow our door to open back up once it's completed. The way we're going to do this is I'm just going to create a simple blueprint. It's going to be an actor, and I'm going to call this my boss. Let's open up this blueprint and let's give our boss a mesh. Just a cube mesh will be fine. It can be a little cube in the world. And with our cube selected, let's scroll all the way down on the right side with the details, and we're going to use the onComponentHit method. So let's hit the little plus there. So what are we going to do? We're going to say that when our cube is hit, if it was a character that hit us, then we're going to open up the door. Therefore, we're going to need a reference to our door. So let's go on the left-hand side and create a new variable that I'm going to call my door to open. Now this is currently set to a Boolean. I don't need it to be a Boolean. I need it to be a reference to a door. So I'm going to hit this drop down and I'm going to look for boss door. Now in this case, I want the blueprint implementation of my door, which is the my boss door, not the regular boss door. This is the C++ version. So I want my boss door and I want an object reference. This means this is going to be a specific door that we're going to open. And I'm going to drive this home even more. When I hit compile, it allows me to edit some certain features about it. And with my variable selected on the right-hand side, I want this to be instance editable. This means that when we put this particular boss monster into the world, we're going to be able to edit the default value of my door to open. And I'll show you more about that when we get there. And now for the actual blueprint for this onComponentHit. We're going to drag off of other actor and we're going to check is a to see that if other actor is a third person character. The reason we're doing this is there's only going to be one third person character and this is a very simple project. But if our other actor is a third person character, then we want to branch. And in the event that this is true, then we want to unlock the door. So we're going to drag in the my door to open, and we're going to call off of that, and we're going to look for that method we created called unlock door. Now, obviously that's not showing up. The reason it's not showing up is we have to expose it to Blueprint. So let's go into Visual Studio. We're going to go into our header file, and right above our unlock door method, we're going to make this a U function, and we're going to add this tag blueprint callable. This is going to allow us to access this within blueprints now. So I'm going to save and compile. And now with that compiled successfully, when I drag off here and hit unlock, you can see that our function now shows up. And when we are successfully hit by a character, we will unlock our door. So let's compile and save that. And let's drag this white cube into the world. Let's raise it up high. Let's move it backwards. So now when I hit play, we run forward. It's super dramatic. The long hallway. We run through. The door slams shut behind us. We can't escape. Danger is imminent. But when I go and I beat up this boss, nothing happens, and we access the none because we did not set our variable. Remember, we did say that we had to set this variable when we went into the world. We can see here that if I select this particular instance, on the right-hand side, the myDoorToOpen variable is set to none, which is why we got that null pointer exception. Hit this drop down and you're able to select a boss door in the world to be the door that opens. And in this case, we only have the one door, so I'm confident to say it should be that door. Let's run it back, let's get dramatic. We run forward, the same thing happens. We cross the threshold, the door slams shut as we cross, we touch our boss, and then it opens back up. Nice and easy. If you found this tutorial helpful, subscribe to the channel, and otherwise, I'll see you in a future video. Have a great day.